Hello and welcome back to Zen in Fanfics. Today we're starting an exciting new series. What if Deku had nature control quirk? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Winterwolf99 on Wattpad. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now, let's dive into the story. In a world of superheroes, supervillains, superpowers, and many other things, there was very little that could surprise society in the current age. After the first person who was born with a quirk, the world changed in the best of ways. More and more people were born with amazing powers, most gaining their abilities by the time they turned 4. Some were late bloomers while others either did not get a quirk or gain their powers through trauma/stress. But, eventually, over 80% of the world's population had quirks. And with the BRH of quirks also came the BRH of heroes and villains. Being a hero became one of the most coveted jobs in the world. They were not only admired and beloved, but they also became the standard for all the good people could do with their quirks. Because while many villains and criminals used their quirks for selfish and evil reasons, the way the heroes used their quirks greatly outweighed how the villains used theirs. There were the regular heroes, also called daylight heroes, who worked out in the open. They were the ones who often were seen on patrols in their home cities and handled most of the crimes that happened during the day. Then there were the underground heroes. They were the ones who worked in secret and often were working with the police on dangerous investigative cases, such as taking down drag labs, stopping trafficking rings, and many other crimes that take place during the night. There were also 3 other types of heroes: rescue, support, and analytical. Rescue heroes were more than often seen during natural disasters or after big villain attacks. They were the heroes who focused on saving the people who were caught in those disasters. They also handled cases like finding people who go missing during hikes, during heavy blizzards, and other nature-related incidents. Support heroes were the ones who had quirks or skills that allowed them to aid other heroes rather than being on the front lines themselves. They were the heroes who tended to have healing, power-up, energy-giving, or force field quirks. They were a great help to the daylight heroes during tougher villain battles. Analytical heroes are the closest thing that comes to a detective version of a hero. They were halfway between a daylight and an underground hero. They often worked with the police while doing their investigations into those who they believe are criminals but needed actual proof. They relied more on their brains than physical fighting. For most, quirks came in when they were 4 to 5 years old. While that did cause a lot of parents to get extra stressed since dealing with superpowered toddlers was not the easiest thing in the world, it became the new normal. Plus, gaining their powers so young allowed the kids to learn how to control their powers enough so that they were not a danger to themselves and others. That was the only exception to the laws of how only licensed heroes were allowed to freely use their quirks. Other jobs, such as doctors, policemen, and firemen, were allowed to use their quirks as well. But only for their jobs. They could not freely use their quirks in their everyday lives like heroes could. Though, to be honest, there were a lot of people who paid very little attention to that law. Many used their quirks whenever they wanted, mostly in their homes to not get caught. But there were still those who used their quirks out and about, such as those with telekinetic quirks using them to get things off high shelves while shopping, or parents with sleep-related quirks using them to help get their kids to bed at night. Not to mention the kids who used their quirks constantly while growing up, both to get used to their powers and also because they were kids. And Izuku Midoriya was one of those kids. But he was more careful and thoughtful than others, mostly because of the quirk he gained when he was little. Izuku was a late bloomer when it came to when he got his quirk. He had almost turned 7 by the time he got it. That was rare outside of forced quirk development and stress-induced quirk development. But Izuku did end up getting his quirk. And it was a powerful one. Izuku's quirk was given the name Nature's Heart. He could control nature. All forms of plant life were under his control. When he had been looked at, his quirk doctor had told him that his quirk factor was one of the strongest he had ever seen. It was so bright and powerful that it nearly burned out the machine they used to look at it. Which was why his quirk was called Nature's Heart rather than simply naming it Nature Manipulation. Because his quirk doctor was sure there was more to Izuku's quirk. It was simply a matter of how much Izuku trained and how much stronger his quirk got as he got older to discover exactly how much he would be able to do with his quirk. Unfortunately, because of his quirk coming in late, Izuku discovered the dark side of the people around him. He had technically been quirkless for almost 3 years. Because of that, Izuku found himself being bullied by those he thought were his friends and those he should have been able to go to for help. The kids around him were constantly bullying him. Some even used their quirks on him. Because they were all still little, their quirks did not do much damage, but it hurt Izuku that they turned on him so easily over something he had no control over. And even when they were doing it in front of their teachers, the teachers never did anything. And yet, after his quirk came in, they all suddenly wanted to be his friend again. Izuku was having none of it. He ignored them every time they tried to talk to him. It didn't help that none of them even tried to apologize for how they treated him. Least of all was Izuku's former best friend, Katsuki Bakugo. He had been the worst, even calling him Deku to call him useless because he had not had a quirk. It didn't help that at the start, he couldn't control his quirk very well. So, flowers were constantly growing and blooming around him. That led to even more bullying, making fun of him for having a girly quirk and for having a weak quirk. However, Izuku did not let it bother him. He had already been through a lot of bullying, so he stopped caring about what they all thought of him. Did it still hurt him how easily his former best friend was his main tormentor? But he had long since stopped letting it show on his face. The combination of his quirk and his experience with people gave Izuku a dislike of most people. He was not completely against humans, but he certainly did not like them. Other than his parents, very few people could gain his trust. The only ones who could get him to like them were ones who looked less human, such as those with more intense mutant-type quirks. But, despite his dislike of humans, Izuku loved quirks. Ever since he was little, he loved to analyze quirks. He liked to watch hero battles to dissect as many quirks as he could. His parents liked to joke and say that his real quirk was having a supercomputer for a brain because of how smart he was. And quirks were where he was at his smartest. He had filled up multiple notebooks with his notes on heroes, villains, and quirks in general. He had been doing it for so long that his first few notebooks were all done in crayon. It did make it easier for him to ignore those who try and bully him. All he had to do was open one of his notebooks and he could easily forget that anyone else was around. Even if it usually also resulted in Bakugo letting off some explosions because of his quirk. Not to mention they would often also call him a nerd and stalker because of how in-depth his notes are. All of it only made Izuku's dislike of humans grow even more. Boom. The common villain attacks in his town also did not help. All Izuku was trying to do was get to school, and now he had to wait for some crazy guy on a rampage to be defeated. But he took out one of his notebooks, anyway, and followed to get more quirk notes. The villain was running toward the train station, anyway. Looks like someone with a giant growing quirk, he muttered to himself as he wrote. Only this guy looks to have a mutation along with his ability to grow. But he doesn't look to be able to grow that big. He appears to only be about twice as tall as a large bus. While threatening, it is on the less powerful side of others with growing quirks, who I have seen grow to be the size of skyscrapers. Izuku made a point of writing down words and phrases like less powerful or smaller version, rather than saying weaker. While he knew how strong his own quirk was, he did not let others know. They all still believed that his quirk was simply making flowers grow. It was better to keep that a secret from those around him other than his parents. Especially so he can see right away a person's true colors. And that means they are the type of person to judge how they treat someone else based entirely on their quirk. Even when he doesn't like humans, he refuses to treat them badly just because of the quirk they were born with. He is mostly indifferent to other people until they earn their way into his good graces. Something that was not easy. As Izuku was taking notes, he eyed two of his town's local heroes already helping against the villain. First was Death Arms, who used his strength quirk to catch falling debris before it could hand on anyone. And then there was Backdraft, the firefighter hero, who was using his fire hose quirk to make water rope barriers to keep civilians away from the fight. At first, it looked like neither would make moves against the villain. But then a third hero appeared, which helped Izuku figure out that the other two were most likely waiting for him. The hero is Kamui Woods, another local hero. And given his quirk, which allows him to grow and manipulate his body made of wood, it was much better to handle the villain than the quirks of Death Arms and Backdraft. And probably the most shocking part of all, Izuku liked him. Robbery, illegal quirk use, endangering civilians. Kamui listed off the villain's crimes as he charged at him. You're the representation of pure evil. Izuku had to fight not to roll his eyes. As usual, Woods is being his dramatic self. He shook his head as he continued taking notes. He dives deep into his hero persona. Likely to make bigger villains underestimate him because they would think he is the type of monologue rather than giving his all during a fight. He continued to watch the wooden hero go after the villain. He jumped onto the roof of the train station and raised his arm. Preemptive binding, lacquered chain prison. Kamui called out his move. His arm started to rapidly grow. It was like someone had managed to drag a tree with growth hormones. The tree arm also started to grow other branches from it, forming the chain prison that the hero had called out. It was a move Izuku had seen the hero use on plenty of villains. It was one of his most well-known and best moves since it often resulted in him capturing many villains at the same time or holding onto larger villains to keep them from escaping. Woods has been practicing. Izuku flipped through his notebook to Kamui's page to update it. He may be a newer hero, but he has been improving faster than other newbies have during their first year of heroics. But the chain prison had barely even gotten halfway to the villain when an unexpected fourth person entered the fight. Canyon Cannon, cried out a female voice. She has prolonged, voluminous, creamy blonde hair reaching down to her waist with two shorter strands curled to frame her face, parted slightly to her right. Her hero costume is composed of a purple and pale tan-colored skin-tight bodysuit, which is accented with orange stripes. The suit appears to have a pair of purple gloves with orange accents on the edge of the cuff. The design is similar to her boots, which are cut off at the thigh in a deep V-shape. The suit also has 3 peculiar orange diamond-shaped dots on the purple top that are located under her chest, and she also wears a purple domino mask with horn-like protrusions on the sides. After she cried out her own attack, she jumped up to give a massive kick to the villain's face. And it was certainly massive given that she had to be at least over 50 feet tall. A new hero, Izuku started muttering as he opened his notebook to some blank pages. She also looks to have a gigantification quirk. A stronger version than the villain's quirk, but she also does not have any mutations as a part of her quirk. She came in charging at what is likely her maximum size. She either can grow up to that size or that is the only size she can grow to. As he was taking notes, his sweat dropped as the crowd of people seemed to swarm in front of him. And he knew the very clear reason why most of the crowd that was swarming was made out of men. "Hi, boys." The hero turned to face the crowd, almost posing with the way she was still slightly bending down to put her behind on full display because of her tight costume. "I'm MT Lady." Izuku sighed as he saw her behavior. He looked up at Kamui Woods, who was almost in shock at what had just happened. Did she just? Kamui slowly brought his arm back to him, turning it back into his arms rather than his chain prison move. She's going to be one of those egotistical heroes. Kamui jumped at the sudden voice behind him. Turning around, he saw Izuku sitting on the edge of the train station roof. He could see the vines wrapped around Izuku's arms. He knew Izuku had used his quirk to get up to the roof. "Has anyone ever told you that you can be really sneaky when you want to be, Izuku?" Kamui said to the young teen. "Given that I like to avoid most humans, I tend to be very sneaky," Izuku smirked. Kamui was one of Izuku's favorite heroes. Not only because of how his quirk was nature-based just like his, but also because of how Kamui didn't let his mutation stop him from being a great hero. Because he was made of wood, along with having a face mostly hidden because of his wood mutation, he likely got teased and bullied for how he looked. Yet, that didn't stop him from choosing to become a hero. Plus, Izuku had to admire the things Kamui did as a hero even at the cost to himself. He had seen news footage of Kamui going to building fires and helping people escape, despite how his own life was in danger because of his wooden body. Izuku might not like most humans, but that didn't mean he was illogical with his hatred. For those that prove they are good people, he does like them. So, what were you saying about lady? Kamui asked the teen he was fond of. Izuku shrugged. I am just saying that she is one of those heroes who love attention. I mean, look at her. Kamui did look at the newest town hero. It was obvious that she did like the attention she was currently getting, especially from the reporters who quickly showed up at the scene. At least she still got the job done, Kamui said. But it was at a cost, Izuku tells him. Ultimate Move would have easily captured that villain with no risk to anyone nor any damage to anything. But she came in with that big kick, sending the villain into that building. Hopefully, since it is still early in the day, not a lot of people would be in there. Not to mention the damage she did to the train tracks because of the force of the kick. Kamui looked down at the tracks the villain had been standing on before he got kicked. Izuku was right. When MD Lady kicked him, his feet had damaged the tracks because of the force. I do understand where you are coming from, Izuku, Kamui says. But we can give her a little slack since this is her first time out as a full-fledged pro hero. You can give her some slack? Izuku rolled his eyes. I am an expert at being bitter at humans for even the smallest of things. You are also an expert at sarcasm and sass, Kamui chuckled. You wouldn't have me any other way, Izuku smirked. Mostly because if I tried to change you in any way, I would have to deal with your mother, Kamui playfully shivered. You would think you would be afraid of my dad given that he is the one with the fire-breathing quirk, Izuku said. But your mother is so much scarier, Kamui says. She can do the most horrible thing ever. She will stop making me strawberry daifuku. No one would ever guess you would have such a big sweet tooth, Izuku rolled his eyes. Kamui had become somewhat of a family friend to Izuku and his family. They met a few times because their neighborhood was on Kamui's regular patrol route. And over time, he started coming around more as he got to enjoy the company of the family. Since he was one of Izuku's favorite heroes, the family allowed themselves to bond with the hero despite how most heroes don't get close to civilians like that. Kamui grew to especially love Izuku's mother's, Inko's, cooking. Mostly because she made, in his opinion, the best desserts he ever had. Mostly her daifuku, which is a dumpling-like sweet that is normally filled with a sweetened red bean paste, but Inko preferred using fruit. So, you want some help getting to school, Kamui offered the teen. The train is likely to take some time to get back in working order. Izuku raised an eyebrow. You want to earn some brownie points with my mother, don't you? The woman is a goddess in the kitchen. Kamui didn't deny it at all. How she can be such a great cook when she is also a busy nurse is beyond me. I don't know where she finds the time to practice her cooking. She is where I get my multitasking skills from, Izuku smirked. Izuku then allowed himself to be picked up by the hero. Kamui used his quirk to securely wrap his arm around Izuku's waist so that he wouldn't accidentally drop him. He then took the teenager to school. Thanks for the lift, Woods. Izuku thanked the hero as he put him back on the ground. Anytime Izuku, the wooden hero, was likely smiling at him under his mutation. I'll make sure to tell my mom how you helped me. Izuku couldn't help but chuckle as he saw Kamui's eyes almost sparkle when he said that. I'll be sure to stop by for dinner in a few days, Kamui said. He then swung away using his quirk. Izuku couldn't help but fondly roll his eyes. The wooden hero was a nice guy, but he certainly had a flair for dramatics. He couldn't help but think of the pre-Quirk Spider-Man comics whenever he saw Kamui using his quirk to swing around the way he does. He walked a couple more blocks to get to school. He had asked Kamui not to drop him off directly at school since he wouldn't like the attention being dropped off by a hero would bring to him. He already hated the school as it was and didn't need any more reasons to hate it. On its own, Aldra Junior High was not a terrible school. It had good facilities, kind lunch staff, janitors who do their jobs perfectly, and up-to-date equipment. The problem was the teaching staff and the other students. From the time he had started the school, Izuku saw all of them as extreme quirkists who valued the strength of quirks as more important than the person with the quirk. Almost all of them had a might makes right way of thinking. They believed the strong should be at the top while the weak are at the bottom. It disgusted Izuku when he saw how those with flashy and heroic quirks were practically worshipped while those with weak quirks were either ignored or downright abused by those around them. And it was only made worse given the elementary school they all went to before was run by the same man. So, this behavior had been going on for years. It had only gotten worse in junior high since that was when the physical abuse between students started. Izuku had kept up the lie that his quirk was simply making flowers grow and bloom, meaning that he was among those considered to have a weak quirk. While he was a target for many of the bullies in the school, they would usually lose interest because he never let their words or actions affect him. His dislike of humans only grew the longer he was around so many quirkist people. So, that allowed him to simply not care about anything the bullies or bad teachers would do. Unfortunately, Bakugo was still one of the worst bullies in the school. Bakugo's quirk allowed him to sweat a similar substance to nitroglycerin, which he could then ignite as powerful explosions. He was labeled as the top dog of the school. He was praised every single day by both the teachers and students. They all would say he had the most powerful quirk and would become the #1 hero, surpassing even All Might. His ego shot through the roof ever since they started feeding it by saying stuff like that. Almost as soon as Izuku sat down in his classroom, he felt an annoying presence next to him. He fought his urge to sigh as he looked at who had approached his desk. "Good morning, Kaken," Izuku greeted his former friend. He knew using his old nickname for Bakugo would annoy him, which was why he enjoyed using it. "Saw you had your little stalker book out again," Bakugo glared at the green-haired boy. "How many times do I have to tell you to stop writing in them, Deku?" Ever since they were kids, Bakugo never let go of that nickname. At first, it had been because he had been quirkless for a few years. After all, his quirk came in late. But even when it did, Bakugo didn't see any use for a flower-growing quirk. So, he continued to call him that, referring to him as useless. "And how many times do I have to ignore you before you learn that I don't care about your orders?" Izuku responded. Bakugo already looked ready to blow his top. Not that he ever looked like he wasn't going to do that. His temper was the most well-known thing about him. Other than his ego, that is. "You are just another extra," Bakugo continued to glare at him. "Just another pebble in my path. You do what I say because that is your role. Just because you see the world as your own personal origin story doesn't mean I have to actually do what you say," Izuku responded. "Unlike everyone else here, I don't cater to your ego, Kaken. Don't look down on me, Deku." Bakugo's hands sparked with tiny explosions from his quirk. "I would have to think about you enough to look down on you, Kaken," Izuku said. Before things could escalate, the teacher walked in. And while he was generally favored by the teachers, Bakugo didn't dare to physically attack him with his quirk right there in the classroom. So, he simply stomped over to his seat, sat down, and glared at Izuku every chance. Izuku could easily imagine how different things could have been. When he believed he was quirkless, he had been incredibly shy and meek. Most would even say he was SBMSSV and weak. If he had stayed that way, he could have only grown even weaker. He likely would have become so desperate for any kind of good attention that he would have clung to Bakugo in a delusional belief of friendship because of their shared past as childhood friends. Not to mention how much worse school would have been given that their quirkist beliefs made the teachers and students believe those who do not have a quirk are less than dirt. He knew he was one of the lucky ones. The ones who managed to grow a thick skin and learn not to listen to the voices of the ones filled with hatred. He may have gotten bitter against humans, but that was certainly better than growing into a depressed and bullied teenager who might not have been able to handle the abuse. Izuku was well aware of how awful life was for the quirkless community. He had been in stores with his mother when he'd seen quirkless people charge double the normal amount. And for no other reason than they did not have a quirk. He had seen the same done for those with extreme mutations and those who could be considered to have villainous quirks. He hated it, but they lived in an extremely quirkist society. How people were treated was based way too much on their quirks or lack of a quirk. He had even experienced that in more ways than at school and with his former friends. His father's job had tried to transfer him to Alaska. If he had remained quirkless, his father would have been forced to take it because of the increase in prices those connected to quirkless people face. His father had to leave his job or else he would have had to leave his family. They were lucky that Inko made a good salary as a nurse and Hisashi was able to soon find work at a company that makes support equipment for heroes. It only made him even more bitter toward humans. Because of their prejudice and biased behavior against quirkless people, his family could have been ripped apart. They were the lucky ones since they were able to pick themselves back up, and Izuku did later get his quirk. Most others were not that lucky. By the time class ended, he was also already at the end of his patience. Especially when it came to when the teacher got to the subject of the schools they wanted to go to after the end of the current school year. Bakugo, after all, had made it clear that he was going to attend UA, the top hero school in the country. Some people even consider it the best hero school in all of Asia. Bakugo thought he was the only one from their school who was trying for UA. You want to attend UA too, right, Midoriya? Their teacher revealed to the whole class with that question. Izuku had to fight back his glare. It was against the rules of every school in the world to reveal private information about a student like that without their consent. But, given he supposedly had a weak quirk, his teacher obviously did not care about that. What? Bakugo shouted. You think you can go to you, Deku? So what if I do? Izuku was never going to let Bakugo intimidate him as he did before he got his quirk. I'm the only one from this pathetic school that will be going to UA, Bakugo continued to glare at the nature user. You don't control the future, Kaken, Izuku tells him. I get to choose where I go to school. And if I choose to go to UA and pass the entrance exam, that is my choice. You don't have any control over that. They probably would have continued arguing, with Bakugo looking ready to start blasting at any second, but their teacher had to continue class. While the teachers never did anything against the school bullies, for the most part, they did at least try to teach still. Even if Izuku was sure they messed with their grades to increase the grades of their favored students while decreasing the grades of the weak students. So, when the bell rang and everyone else left for the day, Izuku wasn't surprised when an explosive hand slammed onto his desk as he was about to get up. He rolled his eyes as he saw Bakugo glaring at him with two of his main lackeys standing close by. He wouldn't call them Bakugo's friends since Bakugo refused to call them that. He only ever called them extras. They were definitely more his minions than they were friends. Izuku never even tried to learn their names. They were just another two quirkist people who believed anyone weaker than them was dirt under their shoes. Which Izuku found to be ironic given that their quirks were not that impressive, even if he refused to believe that any quirk was weak. One could extend his fingers while the other could grow and sharpen his teeth. Neither of which could help in the hero world. They'd be handy for other jobs, but not for being a hero. You've got some nerve talking back to me, Deku. Bakugo immediately got in Izuku's face. Maybe I'm trying to teach you early on that not everyone is going to bend to your will, Kaken, Izuku replied. You just need to realize what they all did, Bakugo glared at him. That I am the future #1 hero. You don't get to mess with my origin story. As I told you earlier, Kaken, just because you see the world as your origin story doesn't mean I have to do as you say, Izuku argued. You really need to learn your place, Deku, Bakugo growled at him. With a quirk as pathetic and girly as yours, you would never be a hero. Unlike me. Bakugo then tried to grab Izuku's notebook. But Izuku took his notebook into his arms before Bakugo could. Taking things that don't belong to you isn't very heroic, Kaken, Izuku glared at him. He got up from his desk, planning to simply leave. He was not in the mood to deal with more of Bakugo's ego-driven tantrums. Your stalker notebooks won't help you become a hero, Bakugo did not let up at all. They only make you an even creepier nerd than you already are. It's called using my brain, Izuku said, heading for the door. Not that you would know anything about that. Being a hero is not always about being the strongest. There is always someone who is going to be more powerful than you. Despite his powerful quirk, Izuku would never believe he was unbeatable. He knew the moment he believed that would be when he would get beaten and then lose all confidence in himself. That was the biggest problem when it came to anyone with a giant ego. Once that ego gets bruised, they throw themselves a giant pity party. Even though the only one they have to thank for it would be themselves. Bakugo clearly didn't like being called out. Especially with what he said next. You'll never be a hero, you useless Deku, he yelled. If you really want to be a hero, take a swan dive off a roof and pray for a better quirk in your next life. Those words made Izuku pause. He had lost so much faith and belief that his old childhood friend had still been in there over the years. But even then he couldn't believe Bakugo would stoop so low as to say something like that to him. He took a deep breath as he did his best to hold back his tears, choosing to continue walking away rather than acknowledge Bakugo or his minions after that. Leaving school, Izuku tried not to think too much about what his former childhood friend had said to him. His powers would sometimes act on his emotions. So, if he wasn't careful, he might accidentally turn the city into a jungle if he lost his temper. Kaken wants to be hero, I know he does, Izuku muttered to himself. The problem is all those Quirks teaching him. They encourage that toxic behavior. Any good hero knows that being a Quirkist only brings pain and suffering. I will be a good hero. And hopefully, Kaken will learn what a good hero is too. A hero. A sudden creepy voice was heard as Izuku entered a small tunnel. If you want to be a hero, you can be my hero. Oh, Izuku swore in his mind. Suddenly, some type of slime started coming out of a nearby sewer. It was the most disgusting stuff that Izuku had ever seen in his life. He did not want to even think of what the slime could be made of. I know the perfect way you can be a hero, little boy. The slime was revealed to have eyes and a mouth. By being my meat suit. Whatever it was started coming right at the teen. Though, it was not going to end well for the gross villain. Boy, you did not catch me on a very good day, Izuku stated. His eyes glowed green. A sign of his quirk. Moments later, a loud voice was heard. Have no fear. Late, Izuku recognized that voice. Looking over, he saw the one and only All Might. The #1 hero in all of Japan. Maybe even the whole world. He had been a hero for over 40 years, which was an incredible feat given how dangerous the job was. But, given that he was currently in a t-shirt and cargo pants rather than his usual hero uniform, Izuku guessed that he hadn't planned on doing any hero work that day. Yeah, you may be a little late, but I had it handled, Izuku tells him. Izuku patted the giant flower that was next to him. The flower was giant and looked at the stage it was about to bloom, but it remained closed. But that was what Izuku wanted. Because inside of the flower was the slime villain that just attacked him. That is a very interesting quirk, young man, All Might tells him. Never underestimate nature, All Might, Izuku smirked. After seeing this, I most certainly will not, All Might chuckled. Here, allow me to make him more portable, Izuku said. His eyes flashed green again as he waved his hand near the flower. The flower instantly started shrinking, but kept the villain inside of the bud. It continued to shrink until it was the size of a regular-sized fishbowl. Izuku picked it up and handed it to the hero. It is a relief to see this villain captured, All Might said. From what I have heard, he has killed over 20 people in an effort to, It was clear he didn't want to say anything else because of Izuku's age. He already said he wanted to make me into a meat suit. Izuku was still disgusted by that. So, no need to sugarcoat things for me, All Might. All right, then, young man, All Might nodded. I shall then deliver this foul villain to the police as quickly as possible. Before you go, Izuku could not help himself as he flipped to an empty page in his notebook. Do you mind? All Might flashed Izuku his signature smile. It is no problem at all, young man, he exclaimed. Taking the pen Izuku offered him, All Might quickly signed his autograph on the notebook page. Thanks, All Might, Izuku smiled at him. It was my pleasure, All Might happily stated. Now, watch me leave dramatically. In a burst of wind, All Might practically vanished because of how fast he was. Izuku looked down at the autograph he just got. He's almost as dramatic as Kamui, he chuckled to himself. But at least he is a good hero like Kamui. Kaken could learn a thing or two from All Might's attitude. Izuku may not be one of those energetic, crazy, bouncing off the walls types of fanboy, but he did still love heroes. He simply had different tastes when it came to his favorite heroes. Which was why he had not freaked out when All Might had come. He admires All Might but simply has a different taste for his favorite hero. With that out of the way, Izuku continued on his way to where he was going. I used to think I understood Kaken, Izuku says. I thought I knew him. I guess I don't. The kid that I originally named Kakin is not there anymore." As he talked, his hand pet the back of a fox that was in his lap. After he had left school, he went to the place he went to every day after school. It was a small clearing in a forest behind his house. After his father changed jobs, they were able to get enough money to move out of the apartment they had been living in. They still lived in Mizudafu, but it was now in a more suburban part of the city. And I know this means Izuku would not have been at the usual train station where the debut of MT Lady took place, but I changed the location to suit where I now have Izuku living, which will happen multiple times in the story. Please go with it. Ever since Izuku had discovered the clearing, he had been using it to practice with his quirk. Unlike Bakugo, he didn't practice out in the open or in public. He didn't see the point of practicing out in public when that could attract unwanted attention before he even started attending a hero school. Plus, it also allowed him to discover that another aspect of his quirk was that animals liked him. He didn't attract them nor could he communicate with them, but they were comfortable around him. Any that he would meet tended to hang around the area, especially if they had been injured and Izuku helped take care of them until they were healed. He enjoyed helping animals. They were certainly better company than most of the humans he was around on a daily basis. I know that he's not fully to blame, Izuku continued talking to the fox in his lap. As much as I hate it, we live in a quirkist society. The fox looked up at Izuku, almost with a sad look in its eyes. It made Izuku gain a small smile. Animals were a lot smarter and more empathetic than most would give them credit for. They understood human speech more than people realized. A few other animals were also around the small clearing. There were some rabbits, raccoons, dogs, cats, rats, and deer either resting in the sun or eating some of the berries Izuku had grown for them. Some birds like cranes, woodpeckers, and owls were around as well. But there were also some other foxes, a leopard cat, a brown bear, and a few Japanese wolves. The wolves were very rare and most of the world thinks Japan has been wolf-free for over 100 years. And Izuku wasn't going to advertise that he had some on his property. But either way, predators and prey lived together in harmony while they were at his home. Do you think it could be possible for Kakin to redeem himself? Izuku continued. He is still just a teenager, so it's entirely possible if he has finally shown the consequences of his attitude. The fox cuddled with him some more as he talked. As per usual, the company of animals was proving to be much better than the company of humans. Izuku, he heard his mom call out from the house. It's dinner time. Come inside and wash up before eating, sweetie. Well, not all humans, Izuku did love his parents very much. Coming, Mom, Izuku called back. I'll check in on you guys one more time before I go to bed. He placed the fox back on the ground before heading to his house. Do you have any plans for today, sweetie? Inko asked her son as they sat around the dining table. I was going to go into the forest as usual to check for injured animals, Izuku tells her. After that, I was going to test out some more plant hybrids I wanted to try. Sometimes, I can't tell if you're a botanist or a mad scientist, Hisashi chuckled, as he ruffled his son's hair. Dad, do you have to go for the hair every time? Izuku tried in vain to tame his wild hair. It's not my fault that you got my crazy hair while getting your color from your mother, Hisashi smirked. Considering my quirk, I like that Mom gave me her hair color. Izuku created a rose in his hand and gave it to Inko. Thank you, Mom. Inko giggled at the silly reason she was just thanked for. But she accepted the rose anyway. No problem, sweetie, she responded. They appeared so normal and yet the Midoriya family was anything but normal. After all, it was only normal in the world they currently lived in. If it was still the pre-Quirk era, it definitely would not be normal for a family to consist of a fire-breathing husband, a mother who can summon small objects to her hands, and a son who can control nature. But, in their Quirk society, some families were a lot weirder than theirs. So, are you working on anything new at work, Dad? Izuku asked his father. We did recently work with Present Mike, Hisashi tells him. He needed to have his speakers repaired after one of his latest battles. He also requested a support item that would help shield his allies against his sonic screams. Can't they just use earplugs? Inko never did understand most support technology, but that was why it was her husband's area of expertise. Quirk-powered abilities like Present Mix are too much for normal earplugs, Izuku says. Earplugs are meant to keep out or muffle normal types of sounds. But Present Mix Quirk is more than just sound. Whenever he uses his sonic attacks, he weaponizes sound waves into an attack that causes his opponents a lot of pain. Even when they try covering their ears, it does very little to help them. This is a similar reason why normal earplugs wouldn't work, either. I've seen news footage of his sound waves being able to send villains flying or breaking through solid concrete walls. His quirk is very interesting with how he can use sound in such a way. I often wonder if it is just with his voice or if it can activate it with any sound he can. Izuku, Hisashi stopped his son. You're mumbling again. Oops, Izuku shyly rubbed the back of his neck. Sorry about that. You don't need to apologize, dear, Inko tells her son. We love how you're able to analyze quirks, but keep in mind those who can't keep up with you when you mumble. This does make me want to take you to work with me, Hisashi chuckled. I want to see what happens with my coworkers when they see how much smarter you are than them. You are not using our son against your coworkers, Hisashi. Inko playfully slapped her husband on his shoulder. Hey, you can't blame me when some of them obviously were barely able to graduate from whatever school they attended, Hisashi says. Especially the team that had been assigned as Midnight's support team. She might be known as the R-rated hero, but that doesn't mean she doesn't deserve actual support tools. I always did think that WHP she carries around looked like it was more for show, Inko said. Another reason for me to dislike humans. Izuku shook his head. Inko and Hisashi did not react at all to what their son said. They were used to their son's attitude toward humans. And neither of them could blame him given how he was treated before he got his quirk. Not to mention how their entire family was treated. Hisashi had been originally tempted to allow himself to be transferred to the USA because he didn't want Inko to be their only source of money. But after spending the day after he got the transfer announcement with his family, he knew he couldn't leave them. So he left his previous job and took care of Izuku when Inko had to take more hours at the hospital. After he got his job at the support company, they were all happier. Both because Inko did not have to take as many hours at work, and also because they could afford a much better place to live with the good money both parents were making. Especially since Izuku got to have a forest as his backyard. Even if both parents had to stop their son from bringing in every animal he came across. They loved their son, but they did not want to deal with an entire house filled with animals that none of them fully knew how to take care of. After they were all done eating, Hisashi left for work while Inko cleaned up the dishes. Izuku then went out into the forest as he previously told his mom he was going to do. Make sure to be careful, sweetie, Inko called out the window as she watched her son go toward the forest. I always will, Mom, Izuku called back to her. And please, no more strays, Inko playfully called out. Izuku blushed as he then entered the forest to look for any injured animals. But just as he promised his mom, he was very careful. His quirk might make it easier for animals to trust him, but they were still wild animals. He knew better than to be reckless around injured animals. Because when an animal gets injured, its survival instincts make it one of the most dangerous things you could encounter. So, Izuku made sure to keep his eyes and ears out while searching. The last thing he needed was to be caught off guard by an injured black bear, leopard cat, or wolf. He wandered around for about 10 minutes before he came across an animal. But that was not the type of animal he ended up encountering. Instead, he came across an average dog. Oh, you poor thing. Izuku slowly got to his knees to gently get near the animal. It was a Shiba Inu, one of the most common and popular breeds of dog in Japan. They were kind of like the Japanese version of a husky. But the reason this dog was earning Izuku's sympathy was because its back leg was currently caught in a bear trap. Izuku hated bear traps almost as he hated genetically modified food. Quickly, Izuku waved his hand to cause some plants to grow near him. Specifically, they were plants that were helpful for healing. He grew some lamb's ear leaves to wrap up the dog's wound along with some goldenrod and echinacea. The lamb's ear was not just good for soaking up BLD, but it also helped cause BLD clots to stop a wound from bleeding. Goldenrod was also known for having anti-inflammatory qualities while echinacea helped to prevent infections. Izuku had studied up on many plants after he got his quirk. He wanted to do more than just learn how to fight with his powers. Nature was such a versatile quirk to have. He could do so much with it. And since he wanted to become a hero, he wasn't going to be a one-trick kind of hero who only focused on one thing. He wanted to be a hero who took down villains, rescued people from disasters, healed the injured, and became a symbol of hope for anyone who needed it. Izuku tried to approach the downed dog, but it growled at him. This was not surprising given that any animal would be on guard when both injured and trapped. "It's okay," Izuku tried to soothe the household pet. "I'm not going to hurt you. I want to help you." The dog kept growling at him. Izuku did not know how long the dog had been there, so he didn't want to wait to take care of it. So, he took out a small plastic bag from his pocket. It was filled with red powder. Izuku took out a handful of it and blew it in the direction of the dog. After a couple of minutes, the dog fell asleep. The bag had been filled with the pollen of the poppy flower. Izuku would use it as a sleeping powder for any animals that needed help but were too afraid to accept any. After he got the dog to fall asleep, he got to work as quickly as he could. First, he controlled some strong roots to pry open the bear trap. Then he immediately used the goldenrod and echinacea on the dog's wound. After that, he wrapped the wound with the lamb ear leaves while using some flower stems to keep the leaves on the wound. He picked up the dog extremely gently after that. Izuku then ran as fast as his legs could carry him through the woods. Ever since his family moved to their new house, he spent a lot of time in the forest. He learned that there were some buildings on the other side of it. Since this was a suburban part of town, there was not as much around as the main part of the city. But there were still some businesses in this part of the city and not just residential buildings. Luckily, one of those businesses happened to be an animal shelter that also would take in injured pets during emergencies. When he saw the buildings coming into view, he went right for the one he knew was the shelter. As soon as he got to the back door, he started knocking on it repeatedly. Soon enough, the door opened and he was met by a familiar face. His name was Koji Koda, though most just call him Koda. He was a very shy boy who was the same age as Izuku. Normally, he was too shy to talk much other than with sign language. But when he was comfortable enough around someone, he does talk. He was mostly noticeable from his body mutation that gives him a very rock-like appearance, but his quirk had nothing to do with rocks. His quirk was called Ani voice, which was the ability to communicate with animals. It was why he was constantly a volunteer at the animal shelter. Given his shy nature, he was much more comfortable with animals than people. Koda, thank the gods, Izuku was relieved it was someone he knew. "I need help." The animal-loving boy immediately took notice of the dog in Izuku's arms. He moved aside to let Izuku come in. "What happened?" Koda asked Izuku with his hands. Izuku had come to the animal shelter many times and spent a good amount of time with Koda. So, while he was not fluent in sign language, he could understand enough to hold basic conversations with the shy teen. "I was in my forest and came across this little guy," Izuku explained. "It was caught in a bear trap." A bear trap? Even Koda's gentle and shy nature could not stop him from looking furious when he heard that. Izuku nodded. "It looks like I'm going to have to give my forest a good sweep to clean out any other traps that might have been set." He placed the dog on the table that was used for treating animals. Koda went to get proper bandages and medicine to treat the wound, so Izuku started taking apart his nature-made bandages. Koda soon came back with the necessary equipment. "What did you use?" Koda asked him. "Lamb's ear leaves to stop the bleeding, goldenrod to hold off any inflammation, and echinacea to hold off any infection," Izuku tells him. "I also had to use poppy pollen to put it to sleep so that I could treat it." Koda nodded in acknowledgement at what Izuku told him. He spread some of the proper medicine paste before wrapping gauze around its leg wound. "Do you know why a regular dog would be in your forest?" Koda asked him. "I never saw a collar," Izuku said. "But it also isn't that dirty, so I doubt it's a stray. My best guess is that it slipped out the door of its owner's house before they could get its collar on it to take it for a walk. Or, it slipped through a gap in a fence of their home." Having been exposed to Izuku and his genius brain for long enough, Koda simply nodded as he accepted his theory. "I will tell my boss and we can make some posters to put out later to inform anyone who might have lost their dog," he signs to Izuku. Izuku only nodded in response. After Koda was done with the dog's wound, he went to put the stuff away. Izuku pulled up a stool to sit next to the dog. He gently petted the dog as the pollen kept it asleep. Normally, poppy pollen was not powerful enough to cause a deep sleep like this. But Izuku's quirk gave me a lot of control over what he does with nature. So, the pollen he created was a lot stronger than normal poppy pollen. This just adds to the many reasons I have to dislike humans, Izuku says as he pets the dog. Koda hummed from where he was standing. There is a part of me that understands hunters, Izuku admitted. But only if it's for food. If it's about sport or entertainment, then it's just disgusting. There are very few wolves left in Japan. If it had been a wolf that got caught, there's no telling what could have happened. Animal lives matter just as much as human lives. To set up traps like that is barbaric. I'm sure the police can handle this once we call them, Koda signed. If they even bother to do anything, Izuku mumbled. The person who set up the bear trap would be guilty of animal abuse, Koda signed. It could also be counted as reckless endangerment since the trap was set up in the woods around a residential area. It's also possible it was illegal hunting as well. I sometimes forget you want to be a hero too, Koda. Izuku gave him a small smile. Your knowledge of the law is impressive. He caused Koda to blush. The shy teen was easily embarrassed by the compliment. But it was true. Despite his shy nature, Koda did want to be a hero. Something that Izuku could see him as since his Ani voice quirk would be great for a rescue hero. He'd be able to use the animals to locate people after a disaster strikes. Or he could use them to find missing people. Especially if it is a case like a child getting lost in a forest during a camping trip. Humans are better than you think they are, Koda signs to him. Tell me that again when there are no longer people like villains, hunters, and quirkists in the world, Koda, Izuku responded. I appreciate your view of the world, but I've seen the darker side of humans. I will be a hero, but mostly for those who deserve it. The ones who hardly feel the hope heroes give because they are the ones ignored or abused with no one to look up to. You will make a great hero, Green, Koda signed. Names do not translate very well into sign language, so Koda tended to give his own nicknames when communicating with sign language. So, with Izuku he typically would refer to him as Green. It might be an obvious nickname given his hair and his quirk, but that didn't mean that it didn't work. Izuku liked it. So will you, Koda? Izuku gave him another small smile. Unknown to the two of them, someone else was paying attention to their conversation. He did not mean to, but once he heard what was being said, he could not help but continue listening. Principal Nezu tended to check in on animal shelters a lot. As the only, as far as he is aware, animal with a quirk, he often found himself feeling the need to make sure other animals like him were treated well. Especially after his time being a tortured experiment because he had a quirk when no other animal showed signs of having one. So, no one could blame him for being a little paranoid over how other animals were treated. He's lost count of the number of cosmetic companies he's taken down because they were testing on animals. So, it was obvious, to say the least, that Nezu did not have the most trust when it came to humans. This only made him even more curious when he hacked into the security cameras of an animal shelter and overheard Izuku also ranting about how he disliked humans. Being a naturally curious creature, Nezu stuck around and listened to the conversation between the teens. Luckily, he was smart enough to understand sign language. Once their conversation was finished, he switched his screen to do a little more digging. It was easy enough for him to use facial recognition to find out who the teens were. Since both of them had UA down as the school they wished to go to after finishing middle school, it only made things easier for him. A curious and mischievous smirk formed on his rat face as he looked at the face on his screen. Well, Nezu says to himself. Aren't you an intriguing person? Aren't you, Izuku Midoriya? I've heard about crazy cat ladies, but your mother is the first crazy dog lady I have ever met, Hisashi joked with his son. Izuku laughed at the joke his father made. At the apartment we lived in before moving here, we weren't allowed pets, Izuku remembered. Mom is probably trying to make up for lost time. For the future, please don't adopt every animal you see, Hisashi playfully pleaded with his son. I love dogs as much as anyone, but I also would prefer to not find myself covered in dog hair after having the mutt sleep on top of me all night. Don't be like that, Hisashi, Inko said from her place on the couch. Kyo just wants to spend time with his new dad. I think we both know that dog is our first grandchild, honey, Hisashi tells his wife. Child, grandchild, whatever label we can use to make sure it's known that this adorable little angel is a part of our family, Inko said. She went back to giving their new dog belly rubs on the couch. The Shiba Inu was soaking up the attention like a sponge. You brought this on us, Izuku, Hisashi said. You were the one who brought that mutt home. Kyo is a purebred dog and you know it, Dad, Izuku said. I never claimed to be a dog expert, son. Hisashi ruffled his son's hair. Again with the hair, Izuku tried and failed to get his hair under control. My father did the same thing to me all my life, so I am carrying on the tradition, Hisashi smirked. Great. Just great, Izuku grumbled. It's not my fault you have a head of hair so cute that I have to ruffle it, Hisashi chuckled. He ruffled Izuku's hair again just to prove his point. Izuku adorably slapped his father's hand away, looking like a kitten when he did. Kyo was the dog that Izuku had rescued from the bear trap. After getting the dog to the animal shelter and getting Koda's help, Kyo got onto the fast path to recovery. It was soon discovered that the dog had been abandoned. Its previous family had recently moved and left it behind. It was a recent thing, which was why the dog still looked mostly fine other than the bear trap injury. Izuku could never leave an animal out to dry after it had just lost so much. It helped that the dog did end up becoming fond of him after it woke up from the pollen-induced sleep and saw how well it had been taken care of. Izuku had not left its side, making sure the dog got properly healed. So, after talking with his parents, they decided to bring the dog into their family. Inko, apparently, was a big dog person and was rarely ever away from it. And as much as Hisashi complained about the dog hair, he loved their new family pet as well. Seeing his mom on the couch with the dog and giving it plenty of pets and cuddles did give Izuku a fun thought of how to tease his father. You're probably just jealous that mom is giving Kyo more cuddles than you, he smirked. Hisashi turned red as smoke embarrassingly came out of his ears. A funny side effect of his fire breath quirk whenever he got embarrassed. You are the only kid who is not embarrassed over thinking of his parents having romantic moments. Hisashi was incredibly red-faced. If it was a thing, you two would have been voted the most adorable married couple in Japan, Izuku says. I'm too used to how you two act around each other to be affected in any way. You know what? Hisashi said. Come here. The fire breather grabbed his son and pulled him close in a headlock. He then gave Izuku a fatherly noogie. Inko laughed at the antics of her husband and son. You two are so cute, she giggled. Well, of course I am, Izuku smirked while still in the headlock. After all, I am your son. I do mean yours, not dad's. Hey, Hisashi protested, giving Izuku another noogie and making Inko laugh again. All right, let the boy go, Hisashi, Inko tells her husband. I think he's had enough of being tormented by you. The fire-breathing father gave Izuku one last noogie before letting him out of the headlock. When it comes to my son, I can torment him as much as I want, he stated. And yet you still let me go just because mom told you to, Izuku smirked. I believe the correct term for you would be that mom had you whipped. Inko laughed even harder at the face her husband made at what Izuku had just told him. Izuku was easily one of the sassiest people anyone could meet. If anyone ever annoyed him, he could sass them to the point they would never bother him again. The only person the sass didn't work on was Bakugo. And that was mostly because his stubbornness worked as a shield against it. Inko and Hisashi were sure their son could get a villain to surrender by simply being his overly sassy self with them. He'd make them turn themselves in just to get away from him. Oh, sweetie, can you do me a favor? Inko got back her composure after laughing for a few minutes. Of course, Mom, Izuku replied. What do you need? I wanted to make stir-fry for dinner, but didn't have the time to get the needed vegetables from the store, Inko tells her son. So, do you mind growing some for me? Izuku smiled at his mom. No problem at all, Mom. I'm happy to help. Any vegetables you want specifically? I was thinking some cabbage, sure take mushrooms, green onions, carrots, and snap peas, Inko listed. You got it, Mom, Izuku gave her a thumbs up. The plant-powered teen then went outside and into the woods behind their house. He didn't want to be caught using his quirk in public even though very few people actually cared about that law. But it was better to be safe than sorry since he didn't want anything to be on his record and ruin his chances of getting into a hero school. He went to a smaller area next to the clearing where he would usually take care of his animal friends. Whenever he would grow fruits or vegetables, he would make sure to grow them close to the clearing so that any leftovers could be eaten by the local animals. He usually would grow more than his mom needed for her recipes, anyway. He leaned down and held his hands toward the ground. His eyes glowed green as he activated his quirk. Quickly, plants started to grow. Specifically, it was the vegetables his mother needed for her stir-fry. The vegetables sprouted and grew at a very quick rate thanks to Izuku's quirk. After he was done growing them, he picked up a head of cabbage, a couple of handfuls of mushrooms, a few carrots, some green onions, and a small pile of snap peas. He was always more than happy to help out his mom when he could. She worked hard as a nurse, so he never blamed her for wanting to come home as quickly as she could, which did lead her to sometimes forget to go to the grocery store. His dad would usually go when she either can't or forgets, but he never makes a grocery list, so he tends to forget things a lot. As he was picking up the last of the vegetables he needed, Izuku suddenly looked up. With his nature powers, he could tell someone was close by. And since neither of his parents would approach him without calling out to him, first, it wasn't someone he knew. Especially since it wasn't like Kodo would try and sneak up on him in the woods and Izuku made sure Bakugo never learned their new address. However, given how self-centered Bakugo is, he doubted the explosive boy was even aware they moved. Making sure he didn't drop any of the vegetables, Izuku quickly turned around. As he did, his eyes glowed some more. Vines shot out to wrap around the person Izuku had sensed coming close. Pulling the person closer to him, Izuku nearly dropped into a dead faint when he saw who he had captured. "Hello, young Midoriya," he was greeted by the smiling face of the only animal with a quirk. "Am I a dog, a mouse, or a bear? The only thing that matters is that I'm Principal Nezu," Izuku gasped. Of all the people he thought could have been sneaking up on him, he didn't think it would be the principal of the high school he wanted to go to. As the only known animal with a quirk, he was probably Izuku's most favorite hero. He was aware of the same kind of issues Izuku was because he also focused on the environment. He had read plenty about multiple charities Nezu had either started or donated to that were all about protecting animals and the environment. Between him, Gang Orca, and Selkie, there was a big movement to clean up the ocean. He was Izuku's biggest inspiration. He represented everyone who was thought of as less than human because of their quirk. Those with extreme mutations caused by their quirks or their genetics looked up to him. Just like them, he was looked down on by Quirkists for something completely beyond his control. He couldn't control that he was an animal any more than they could control their mutations. "I see that my reputation precedes me," Nezu chuckled. "It's hard not to know about you when you are both the first known animal with a quirk on top of being the principal of the most famous hero school in Asia," Izuku tells him. "You do have a point, young Midoriya," Nezu said. That was when it hit Izuku that Nezu had called him by his last name twice, meaning that he knew his name. "Why do you know my name, sir?" Izuku asked him. He didn't ask how. He knew since he doubted that Nezu would tell him that. He might be a hero, but Nezu was also known to never tell anyone about his methods. Even in interviews or press conferences he's been a part of, he only gives vague hints as to how he can take down villains with the power of his mind. Nezu hummed as he grinned. "You ask me, I know your name instead of how. I knew you would be interesting." "I would also appreciate an answer," Izuku stated. His eyes continued to glow as he continued to control the vines around Nezu. He did not let go of the hero principle and he wasn't going to until he got the answers he needed. "It was an accident, really," Nezu admitted. "I check in on animal shelters and animal hospitals all over Japan. Call me paranoid, but I can't help myself. Considering you have the highest number of takedowns when it comes to animal abusers, poachers, and animal traffickers, I understand," Izuku said. "But what does that have to do with me?" I happen to have been looking through the security cameras of your local animal shelter recently. Nezu shows no sign of hiding his actions. And it just so happens that I was watching when you brought in the dog which ended up becoming yours. Well, that isn't creepy at all, Izuku couldn't help but comment. Nezu shrugged as best he could while wrapped in vines. He looked to not regret his actions at all. Something that was very on brand for him. I did not mean it with any intentions in mind other than checking on the animals, Nezu stated. But I could not help but find myself intrigued when I heard what you were saying to young Koda. Izuku would have blushed from hearing that the hero had heard about his dislike of humans. But he did not, and still does, regret anything he had said. He doesn't hide that he doesn't like humans and he never will. It wasn't his fault. Most humans were either quirkist, evil, or both. Looking at the hero principle, Izuku let him down from his vines and retracted them as well. We should talk about this with my parents, Izuku says. Nezu simply nodded in response before the two headed for Izuku's house. So, you secretly watched our son and researched him. Inko had her arms crossed as she looked at the animal hero. Inko was not the tallest woman in the world. Most people would consider her to be quite short. But she was still taller than Nezu. So, her staring down at him even while they were sitting down made her more intimidating. She was a mother bear feeling protective of her cub. You have a very interesting son, Mrs. Midoriya, Nezu says. I did not originally mean to hear anything he said. I was simply checking on the animal shelter when your son was there. It was luck that I overheard him. After Izuku had come in with Nezu, it had been a shock to his parents. While they were used to Kamui Woods coming over, it was another thing when it came to seeing the principal of UA. However, if they were being honest with themselves, they were not completely shocked that Izuku was able to get noticed by one of his biggest heroes. Given his specific taste in heroes, it made sense for him to be able to bond with the ones he was able to meet. I hope this isn't about Izuku's distaste toward humans. Hisashi was also protective of his son. It is, but not in a bad way, Nezu said. That was certainly an unexpected answer. The parents thought that any hero would say that it was not a good thing for Izuku to not like humans. Especially if they knew he wanted to become a hero. Really, Izuku was just as shocked as his parents. If I were anyone else, I might see a bit of an issue with it, but I am not, Nezu continued to smile. Out of all the heroes of Japan, I can understand your dislike and distrust toward humans the most. I am sure you can understand why it is hard for us to trust heroes when it comes to our son, Inko says. Nezu nodded. I can understand that very well. I also have a hard time trusting others. This is why I take security measures at UA very seriously. So, why are you here then? Hisashi asked the hero. As I said, you have a very interesting son, Nezu says. Being the curious being that I am, I looked up a few things after I heard the conversation between him and his friend. As an applicant to UA, I have permission to look at his Quirk registration form. That alone was quite an intriguing read. Nature quirks are rare in general. One as powerful as yours is even rarer. That is why we do our best to keep the true nature of his quirk under wraps, Inko says. After our son was treated badly for the years he was quirkless, Hisashi said. When his quirk did come in, we all felt that nobody deserved to know what he could really do. If they choose to be quirkist, then they don't matter to me, Izuku added. As I said, you're interesting and you intrigued me, Nezu says. Especially since, as you likely are aware, I have recently been able to lift the restrictions at UA that prevented those like quirkless kids from being able to attend our school. I did read about that, Izuku nodded. You face a lot of resistance from both the UA Board of Directors and the Hero Public Safety Commission. But you were still able to get it approved. Message boards and social media of quirkless people and others who have faced quirkist discrimination were blowing up with respect for you. Everything I did was for them, Nezu says. I have always had zero tolerance for bullying, discrimination, and harassment. Everything brought to me, I take 100% seriously. All students who come to me for help will always get it. There is nothing I wouldn't do for my students. Even if they are not yet my students. I can see why you're my son's favorite hero, Inko said. Mom, Izuku did not want his mom to embarrass him like that. Do we need to remind you, son, of the time you once begged us to buy you a Nezu plushie when you saw one in a store? Hisashi teased. Dad, Izuku covered his face with his hands to hide his bright red face. Nezu only chuckled as he saw the family interact with each other. He had certainly seen plenty of families like them whenever he watched the security cameras of UA during parent-teacher conference week. It warmed his heart to see such loving families like the Midoriyas. No need to be embarrassed, young Midoriya, Nezu tells him. Though, I have to admit that you are probably the first fanboy of mine I have ever met. I am not a daylight hero, after all. Not being a daylight hero doesn't make what you do any less important, Izuku says. That would be like saying Sir Night Eye isn't a good hero just because he stepped away from the spotlight after he was no longer All Might's sidekick. Or saying the Wild Pussycats aren't good heroes just because they're a rescue team rather than a team that fights villains. All types of heroes are important. Hearing that made Nezu smile once again. I am very happy to hear you say that, young Midoriya, Nezu said. You are all probably wondering why I am here. My reason is that when I looked into Izuku after hearing his interesting conversation with young Koda, I grew very interested. Inko and Hisashi shared a look. Being the protective parents they are, both looked ready to defend their son even if it was against a hero. Hisashi might normally only use his fire breath for welding support items at work, but he was aware he could have been a hero with it if he had wanted to. So, he was more prepared to fight if things came down to it. What do you want with our son? Inko's hand twitched as she fought the urge to use her quirk to bring a knife to her hand. I want to make him my personal student, Nezu bluntly stated. If it were a cartoon, there would have been a car crash sound effect from the looks on the faces of the three Midoriyas. Never in any of their lifetimes would they have thought they would hear something like that. Izuku alone looked ready to either faint or burst into another of his mutter storms out of shock. What? Was all Izuku could get out. I want you to be my personal student, Nezu repeated. From what I have seen of you today and what I have researched, you have an incredible mind. I want to help nurture your analysis skills while also preparing you for UA. You have also shown the critical thinking skills that very few heroes nowadays have outside of other analysis heroes like myself. You want to be known for more than just your powerful quirk, and you also wish to do more than fight villains. I have never made an offer like this before, but you have intrigued me that much, young Midoriya. Izuku looked at both his parents for guidance. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him. A hero, his favorite hero, was offering to be his mentor. He couldn't have even dreamed something as amazing as this could ever happen to him. It's your choice, sweetie, Inko tells him. You've wanted to be a hero since you knew what a hero was. How you get there is your choice. No matter what you decide, we will support any decision you make, Hisashi adds. Izuku thought about it for a few minutes. It was a big decision and he needed to think things through. Eventually, he looked at Nezu and gave his answer. Out of everything Izuku imagined he would be doing with his life, visiting the best hero school in the country before he was a student, there was not one of them. Yet, here he was, standing there with the front entrance of UA right in front of him. He wasn't sure if he was about to explode with excitement or faint out of shock. It had been only a week since he agreed to become Nezu's personal student. So, it was still so unbelievable to him that his favorite hero was going to be his mentor. His parents might tease him over being a Nezu fanboy, but it was still true that he looked up to the animal hero. It was hard for him not to, given his preference for nature and animals to humans. His mother had dropped him off at the gate, telling him to call her when his lesson was done so that she could pick him up. They didn't have a set time to meet because neither of them knew how long the lessons would be. Everything was still fresh and new, so they were taking things one day at a time. As Izuku walked toward the school, he couldn't help but be in complete awe of the building. The main building of UA looked like two gigantic mini skyscrapers with the walls made entirely out of lines of floor-to-ceiling windows. Both skyscrapers were connected by hallway bridges that also looked to be made of floor-to-ceiling windows. If Izuku didn't know better, he would have thought the entire building was glass. But he did know better. With a being as smart as Nezu in charge, he knew the windows were only for the looks. It was the inside that held all the reinforced stuff to handle the wide range of quirks that came through their doors. Very large doors at that. Izuku guessed the large doors were for those who have quirks that made them super tall. From what Izuku knew, while this was the main building of UA, the school had many other facilities at its disposal, such as fake cities for hero students to train in, the stadium where the sports festival was held, off-campus areas for intense training, and several gyms that any student can use if they choose to. Nezu certainly did not hold back when it came to providing the best for his students. After entering the school, Izuku did not expect to already encounter a hero. He knew all members of the staff were heroes, but it was still shocking to encounter one right when he entered the building. Howdy, he was greeted by the cowboy hero Snipe. You look a little young to be around these parts. You a sibling of one of our students? Izuku shook his head, trying hard not to ask for an autograph. He may not like humans, but he was still a hero fanboy at heart. My name is Izuku Midoriya, the teen tells the hero. I have an appointment with Principal Nezu. If Snipe was shocked, he didn't make it known. Not that Izuku could even tell given the mask Snipe always wears. He never did understand why the hero wore a gas mask when it had nothing to do with his quirk. But there was a reason why his father worked in support and he wanted to be a hero. Nezu, huh? Snipe said. He didn't tell any of us he was meeting anyone. He likely didn't tell any of you because this has nothing to do with UA, Izuku shrugged. It's between me and him. Relax, partner, Snipe says. Most of us gave up trying to understand Nezu's thought process a long time ago. If you're here because of him, I don't question it. I'm going to be hearing a lot of things about Nezu like that, aren't I? Izuku asked the hero. Snipe simply shrugged. We all respect Nezu as a friend and colleague, but we can all admit that he can be extremely confusing. I will keep that in mind, Izuku says. Let me take you to his office, Snipe offered. Unless you would just want some directions? It probably would be better if you took me, Izuku said. If I was wandering around UA by myself, I'd likely get stopped by other hero teachers here who would want to know who I am. And I would rather not be late. You got a good head on your shoulders, kid, Snipe tells him. Snipe gestured for Izuku to start following him. The teen quickly walked by his side. They walked through the halls, toward the principal's office. May I ask you some questions, Mr. Snipe? Izuku didn't want their walk to be in silence. Just as long as they aren't about UA's entrance exam or anything else like that, Snipe replies. Izuku shook his head. I wouldn't ask anything like that. Getting into UA will be from my actions, not from the information I would get. Never would have dreamed I'd get an answer like that from a UA hopeful, Snipe admitted. I've been told many times that I'm not your average teenager, Izuku says. I know many other teenagers who would jump at the chance to learn inside information. I think they are the same type who are actually cowards because they have no faith in their ability to do it themselves. They can talk a big game, but as the saying goes, they can talk the talk, but can't walk the walk. I repeat what I said earlier about you having a good head on your shoulders. Snipe nodded in agreement with what Izuku was saying. So, what are your questions? Izuku took out his notebook, ready to take notes. He specifically brought the one he had written analysis for heroes he knew worked at UA. Heroes like Snipe, Present Mike, Midnight, Lunch Rush, Recovery Girl, and of course Nezu. Most people think your quirk only works with bullets because you use guns, but that's not true, right? Izuku asked him. Your quirks works on anything you throw or launch as long as it originates from you. But you use guns because the objects that come from you remain the same force originally used to throw or launch them, right? If Izuku had to guess, Snipe's eyes had widened behind his mask. The teen knew he shocked people when he was able to figure out their quirks as easily as he does. Most believe he has some sort of analysis or intelligence quirk until they see him doing something with plants. I am starting to see how you got Nezu's attention, kid, Snipe stated. Not even some of my coworkers know that about my quirk. I am a quirk nerd, Izuku admitted with no ounce of shame. I've been analyzing quirks since the time I could comprehend what a quirk even is. He was rapidly taking notes in his notebook. Snipe may not have directly answered his question, but his reaction was all the answer he needed. Well, you are correct, Snipe answered the question. My quirk allows me to send any object at anyone no matter how it comes from me. But, as you said, it remains the same speed the entire time. It's why I use guns. So that I can do real damage rather than just cause bruises. I bet if you used your quirk on heavy objects, they could still do damage if they don't come at a bullet speed. Izuku was in full mutter mode. Pushing a boulder off a cliff or any other type of thing where you can use gravity to increase the force of your throw before letting the object go would give you more variety of attacks. Especially in different environments. Since your quirk allows you to always hit your target, it wouldn't matter how or where you throw something. You can take inspiration from the pre-quirk era Olympics. Discus throw, hammer throw, javelin, shot put, and archery are all events you can use for inspiration to do a lot of damage without the use of guns. Sure, it wouldn't go with your cowboy theme, but this is about your quirk and not your. Snipe cut him off, feeling overwhelmed by everything Izuku was saying. Whoa, he held his hands up to stop Izuku. That is a lot of information at once, partner. Y'all have quite the brain in your head. Izuku shyly rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, I tend to do that a lot, he admitted. When I start muttering my analysis, not even my parents can keep up. My dad likes to use me to bring cocky coworkers of his down a few pegs when they meet a kid who is smarter than them. That, at least, got a laugh out of the cowboy hero. Now, I see why Nezu got interested in you, Snipe chuckled. Anyone with a brain like that would interest him. It's rare for someone to keep up with his train of thought unless they also have an intelligence quirk. That makes sense, Izuku said. Especially since many quirks can be very specific when it comes to what they are capable of doing. Take intelligence quirks for an example. There can be quirks that turn someone into a math genius who would never need a calculator for anything. But other than math, they are average for everything else. I think Nezu is the only known being with an intelligence quirk that works on the entire brain rather than single parts of it. I think you're right, kid, Snipe agreed with him. Even with all the people I've worked with since I became a hero, I've never met anyone else with a quirk like Nezu's. It probably doesn't help that there are billions of people with quirks in the world, Izuku shrugged. Makes it hard to know every type of quirk there is without access to a worldwide catalog of quirks. Even something like that even exists. If it does, Nezu is likely the one who would create it, Snipe chuckled. Whether it's legal or not is the question. Soon they came up to another door. This one with a Principal Nezu nameplate next to it. I guess this is my stop, Izuku said. It was nice to meet you, Mr. Snipe. I wish you luck, kid, Snipe says. Anyone who deals with Nezu is going to need luck simply for the sake of their sanity. He chuckled at his joke before shaking Izuku's hand and walking away. The teen took in a deep breath before raising his hand and knocking on the door. Come on it, young Midoriya. Nezu's cheerful voice could be heard on the other side of the door. Izuku opened the door and entered the office. Honestly, he expected something more eccentric from the hero principal. The office was very simple. All it had in it was a large desk, especially large compared to the tiny principal, with a computer on it and a classic dark blue leather rolling chair behind the desk. The office also had a couple of couches on either side of a coffee table, likely for when the principal had any guests. I will be honest, Principal Nezu, Izuku stated. I was expecting something more. Nezu chuckled. You are not the first person to react like that when they see my office. In all honesty, I don't see much use for a lot of useless decorations that serve no real purpose. And as proud as I am of my accomplishments, I am not a bragging type of person. So, I don't advertise all the things I have done. Also, there's no need to call me Principal, Mr. Midoriya. You're my student, so you can call me Nezu-sensei. Yes, Nezu-sensei, Izuku said. He could see the logic in not having decorations for his office. He expected nothing less from Nezu given his quirk. So, most of his trains of thought likely came down to what was logical or not. Nezu got up from his chair to walk closer to his personal student. Izuku had to fight the urge to laugh since when Nezu got off the chair, he disappeared behind his desk because of his height. It was only his immense respect for the animal hero that kept him from laughing. Nezu walked over to one of his couches and gestured for Izuku to sit on the opposite. The teen immediately did so. We have a lot to cover, Mr. Midoriya, Nezu tells the teen. You can call me Izuku, Nezu-sensei, Izuku replies. Mr. Midoriya is my father. Plus, even though I am your student, I am not a UA student. Not yet, anyway, Nezu chuckled. I am sure you will be more than ready by the time the entrance exam comes. With you as my mentor, I don't doubt it, Izuku says. I do hope that means it's because of your longing to learn rather than trying to use me to get insider knowledge. Nezu took out a cup of tea from somewhere and took a sip. Izuku had no idea where the tea came from, but he wasn't going to question it. After what he learned from Snipe, he was likely going to see a lot of weird things while learning from Nezu. I have just told this same thing to Snipe on my way here, Izuku says. I want to get into UA on my skills. Not because I had information they did not. I see anyone willing to do that as a coward who doesn't think they can get in on their own. Or, they are simply lazy and don't want to put in any real work. That's not who I am. My mother is a nurse and my father is a support engineer. You don't get jobs like that without hard work. I'm not going to disappoint them by taking the easy way in life. It's words like that which show why I wanted you as my student, Izuku, Nezu said. You're certainly not your average teenager. Izuku sighed as he heard that. There were times when he did act his age. Especially when he would go into fanboy mode when he meets his favorite heroes. But he knew the way he acted was strange when compared to other kids his age. I grew up pretty quickly, Izuku tells his new mentor. Since you said you looked up my Quirk registration, you already know that it didn't come in until I was 7. Nezu nodded. I did see that, yes. My best guess would be that you were not treated very well because you spent those years quirkless. Not treated very well is an understatement, Izuku says. As an animal with a quirk, you know more than anyone what it means to be different. In today's world, being quirkless is the worst news anyone could ever get in their whole lives. In just the 3 years I did not have my quirk, I was bullied relentlessly while my teachers didn't even blink as my classmates beat me daily. With and without their quirks. And even when my quirk came in, my parents and I decided to keep the full power of it secret because of how we knew others would react. Considering how I'm still treated for having a weak quirk, I think it was the right choice. And what makes you think it was the right choice? Nezu continued to sip his tea. From your own words, it's clear you'd be treated better by showing off your true strength. Because none of it would be real, Izuku stated. My supposed friends turned on me the second they believed I didn't have some big powerful quirk. My teachers didn't even think I was worth anything other than a punching bag to those with real power. This entire might makes right way of thinking. The way people put so much of how they treat others based entirely on the type of powers they have. It's wrong. No one should be treated like they're worth more or worth less than anyone else simply because they have power or not. Showing off my quirk to be treated better would have only made me a part of the problem. Nezu set down his teacup, putting his paws together in his lap as he let Izuku's words sink in. It's very rare to find someone like you, Izuku, he tells him. Someone who sees the true damage our society causes by relying so much on quirks. I speak from experience how hard it is to be able to find your place in the world when you're different. Between my height, my origins as an animal, and my lack of understanding of human nature, I was looked down on for a long time. I view it as a true miracle that I made it to where I am today. As an educator, this is the best place to be to help teach the next generation. In more ways than one. You want to help change the world, Izuku guessed. It is impossible to truly change the world, Nezu says. The most we can do is leave the world a better place than how it was when we arrived. There are always going to be those who would fight back against true change. After all, there are those who, even after 200 years, still view quirks as a type of sickness that needs to be cured. Izuku had to force himself not to cringe as he heard that. He had read in history books about organizations formed during the Dark Age of Quirks that were all about finding a cure for quirks. As Nezu said, there were likely still those around who had those same beliefs. You know about my dislike of humans, Izuku says. I hate everything humans do that makes society like this. My school is practically a breeding ground for only the strong are worth anything type of thinking. These are adults, teachers, who are teaching children this way of thinking. How many of their students will go on to become villains because they believe they have the right to attack anyone they want simply because they view them as weaker than they are? There is no doubt in my mind that my school isn't the only one. Nezu couldn't deny that Izuku was right. He had seen many students enter UA with that type of thinking. They were usually ones who desperately needed Eraserhead's expulsion technique to kickstart their lessons on how wrong that type of thinking was. And he couldn't deny how many of them were either permanently kicked down to general education or completely expelled from UA because they refused to learn their lesson. He made sure to keep an eye and ear out in case any of them tried to enter a lesser-known hero school so that they could become toxic heroes. From the moment I saw you on that security camera, Izuku, I knew you had a bright future ahead, Nezu said. Because despite not liking humans, you still want to make a better future for everyone. You were tormented for years. You're still treated horribly. With a quirk as powerful as yours, I could not blame you for turning toward the villain side. You have a good heart. Something I admire in someone so young. Izuku could feel his heart racing at the kind words from the hero he looked up to his entire life. He knew his dislike of humans could hold him back when it came to his dream of being a hero. But to hear his biggest hero say that he had a good heart meant more to him than anything else in the world. Especially since he didn't think someone like Nezu would be as in tune with human emotions as real humans would, given he was so logical. I will do my best to make you proud, Nezu-sensei. Izuku smiled at him. I will make sure you are the best hero you wish to be, Izu. Nezu smiled back. So, what should we start with? Izuku asked the hero principal. We can start by coming up with a variety of punishments for one of my hero homeroom teachers. Nezu looked a little too happy at the thought of punishing someone. Huh? Izuku raised an eyebrow. That is certainly different from what I expected my first lesson to be. Nezu got up from the couch he was on and made his way back to his desk, taking his tea with him. Izuku got up and followed him. I give a lot of power to my teachers, Izuku, Nezu tells him. I let them teach as they see fit, including letting one of the homeroom teachers for the hero students expel his students whenever he wants. He expels them? Izuku was shocked. He doesn't have to go through you for approval? I'll be honest with you. Izuku, Nezu got back into his chair. Most of his expulsions are what he calls logical ruses. He would expel a student, but then let them know after a day or so that it wasn't real. He does this to teach the arrogant, lazy, and cocky students that they need to shape up or risk getting kicked out for real. And for many students, it does help them, either by giving them the wake-up call they need about the work they need to put in or helping them realize that they don't truly want to become a hero. I'm guessing this time is different, Izuku says as he gets closer to Nezu's desk. Nezu sighed. Seemed I became too lenient with him. He expelled his entire homeroom. And he's not brought any of them back yet. There's a black mark on all their records. I have a lot of work to do to get them back in and get rid of those marks, since it could seriously mess with their futures. He was already typing on his computer. Izuku had never seen someone type as quickly as Nezu was. What makes this time different from the previous times he's expelled someone? Izuku couldn't help but ask. Maybe everyone in this year's class was not cut out to be heroes. He expelled them all on day one, Nezu stated, looking Izuku in the eyes. Izuku's jaw would have hit the floor if he were in a cartoon. I'll make a list of potential punishments. Izuku took out an empty notebook he had brought. Nezu chuckled. He knew there was a reason why he liked Izuku. You know better than others the power a place like this holds, Izuku, Nezu tells his student. I certainly do, Nezu-sensei, Izuku responds. The teen and his mentor were walking through some of the woods that were nearby UA. Nezu had wanted to get a better taste of Izuku's quirk during this lesson. So, he knew the woods was the best place for them. Nature quirks are rare, which I'm sure you know, Nezu says. Do you mean in a general sense or just quirks as powerful as mine? Izuku asked. A little bit of both, Nezu responds. Of all registered quirks I am aware of, not many involve nature. And for those that do, they are far from being as powerful as yours. I can understand that, Izuku nodded. I know a quirk as powerful as mine has to be rare. Not just for nature quirks, but quirks in general. Quirks might evolve with each generation, but there are those that can get more specific rather than simply stronger, Nezu says. One example being a student currently in the business course. His parents also attended UA in the business and support courses. His father was a literal walking Wi-Fi signal while his mother was able to control smaller pieces of technology, such as phones and drones, but only when she was the creator. Their son's quirk is a combination, but not as overly powerful as one would think it would be. Izuku nodded. Most would think their quirks would combine into a strong technopathy quirk. Between the Wi-Fi quirk of his father and the minor technology manipulation quirk of his mother, most would believe any children they had would have quirks that would revolve around manipulating the technology around them. An advanced and evolved form of his parents' quirks. Correct, Nezu said. But that is not his quirk. Rather than something as strong as a technopathy quirk, his quirk enables him to boost the power of any piece of technology he is holding. The quirk singularity theory, Izuku remembered reading about that. The theory that talked about how every generation of quirks will get stronger and stronger until they eventually become too powerful to be controlled even by the ones born with their powers. From your tone, I take it you do not believe in the theory, Nezu guessed. I don't, Izuku stated. Quirks are a part of human evolution. In the beginning, there were a lot of those who couldn't handle their powers. Something that made sense back then since it was the first generation of quirks. Those burned by their fire powers, blinded by their light powers, given frostbite by their ice powers, bones broken by their own super strength, and so on. But as each generation came and went, evolution occurred for both people and quirks. Our bodies adjusted to be able to handle the powers we would get. So, scientifically speaking, as long as humans continue to evolve alongside quirks, quirks can't become too powerful for us to handle. Very well reasoned, Izuku, Nezu nodded. I couldn't have said it better myself. Even if there is a case where quirks get too powerful, evolution would work to reverse what it has done, Izuku says. Meaning that what nature gave, it can take away. So, your theory is that if quirks do get too powerful, evolution would fix that by taking quirks away, Nezu said. Yes, sensei, Izuku nodded. It would start by making quirks less powerful before taking them away entirely. You have quite an intriguing mind, young man, Nezu says. I've always been smart, or at least that's what my mother's always said, Izuku shrugged. She tells me that I got bored with normal stories she would try and read me when I was young, so she chose to read the medical books she still had from when she was in medical school. You got started on your academic path quite early, Nezu chuckled. Even with a powerful quirk, I've had to study a lot to be able to properly use it, Izuku says. Nature is appealing but also dangerous. Poisonous plants can be just as deadly as anything created by science. Especially when most people tend to underestimate nature. They're so focused on pretty flowers that they forget about the thorns. I have often felt the same with many of the hero students who have come through the halls of UA, Nezu said. People get so focused on those with strong and flashy quirks that they ignore the hard work the students put in. Mastery of quirks is much more difficult than people believe. The focus on quirks is one of the things I want to change as a hero, Izuku says. Society in general has become so focused on quirks that they forget about the ones who have them. It's more than just about better treatment for the quirkless or those unfortunate enough to have quirks labeled as villainous, but also for those with flashy quirks. Intriguing, Nezu was curious. Care to elaborate? I've seen it a lot, especially in my school, Izuku explains. Those with strong and flashy quirks are usually pushed into heroics. For years, they get told what great heroes they would be because of their quirk. They get told that so often that they don't get the chance to form a real idea of what they want to do with their lives. It's like they don't get a choice to do anything other than become a hero. For someone who says he doesn't like humans, you have a lot of sympathy for them, Nezu tells his apprentice. Izuku sighed. I still don't like humans, but I make it a point not to hate them. I want to be a hero to make the entire world better. Not just better for some. I think you overestimate your dislike toward humans. Nezu sat down on a nearby large rock. I don't think you dislike them as much as you believe you do. Oh, believe me, I don't like humans, Izuku says. Humans are barbaric, selfish, egotistical, polluting hypocrites. They rely too much on quirks and place people into categories based on those quirks or a lack of a quirk. I am simply trying to make them into less horrible beings. Nezu sighed as he heard that. It had been clear from the first time he talked with Izuku that he was bitter over how he had been treated when he was quirkless. And that bitterness only grew from other things he saw and experienced while growing up. He couldn't blame Izuku since he experienced similar feelings throughout most of his life. And even after so many years, he still felt distrust and anger toward humans over what happened to him. He tries his best to move on, but Recovery Girl told him more times than he could count that trauma like his never fully goes away. How about we move on? Nezu decided a change of subject was necessary. As you wish, Nezu-sensei, Izuku says. Nezu stayed on the large rock he had been sitting on. He took out a little tablet that was perfect for a being his size. Likely, he was going to use it to take notes on Izuku's quirk. So, explain to me any limits you have found with your quirk, he asked. So far, the only limit that I know for sure is fire, Izuku says. It's an obvious weakness, but I doubt there is anyone with an all-powerful quirk. Even number one heroes like All Might and Star and Stripe have to have limits with their quirks. A very good point, Nezu types on his tablet. I guess another thing that could be considered a weakness would be my eyes, Izuku says. Since they always glow whenever I use my quirk, I can't use it sneakily like others can. My eyes would immediately give it away. Some support gear you can look into for your hero uniform could be a pair of glasses or goggles specifically made to keep in the light of your eyes without blocking your vision. Nezu takes more notes. One of my teachers uses something similar because his eyes are the focal point of his quirk. I will make sure to update my sketches. Izuku nodded in agreement with Nezu's suggestion. He wasn't much of a drawer. He preferred to write. But the one thing he enjoyed drawing was ideas for his potential hero uniforms. He had so many ideas that he didn't know which one he truly wanted to use in the future. How about you give me a small demonstration of your quirk? Nezu suggests. Yes, sensei, Izuku nodded. Izuku's eyes glowed green to show that he was using his quirk. Quickly, plants grew around him. On either side of him grew 2 new Japanese maple trees. He added to them by making vines wrap around the trunks and making roses bloom on the vines. Impressive control. Nezu takes more notes. My quirk has always come easy to me, Izuku admits. Plants do what I want no matter what it is. So, you haven't found a limit to what you can make nature do, Nezu continued taking notes. I know quirks are known for defying the laws of physics and most laws of the universe, but mine goes way beyond that, Izuku says. I've been able to make nature energy as a replacement for electricity, create living creatures made of plants, and even see through the eyes of nature to spy. Very interesting indeed. Nezu was amazed. It's rare for me to find a quirk I have never seen before. Yours is certainly unique in many ways. It is, Izuku agreed. It's not limitless though. While I can use it for long periods of time, I do have a limit. The best explanation I can give is that it's like I have an internal energy source for my quirk. At rest, it refills from whatever energy I recently used. When in use, it slowly drains. But the more advanced things I do with nature, the more energy I use. Nezu took more notes on his tablet. So, you have a small stockpiling portion to your quirk? Nezu guessed. I guess so, Izuku shrugged. I classify my quirk mostly as an elemental type quirk. Similar to how I would classify Endeavor and Kamui Wood's quirks. Nezu nodded, adding more to his notes. What other types of limits would you say your quirk has? He asks. I have more energy when I'm connected to the earth, Izuku explains. For obvious reasons, I have a lot more energy to use my quirk when I have a direct connection to it. So, it would be different if you were on a boat or plane, Nezu hypothesizes. Izuku nodded. While I can still use my quirk, it's not for as long as when I am on land. It's also harder for me to do the more fantastical elements when not on land. Truly fascinating, Nezu took more notes. You have a very good grasp of what your quirk is capable of. I practice a lot in private, Izuku explained. Because of how powerful my quirk is, My parents always told me it was best to make sure it was kept as big of a secret as possible. It's why all my teachers and classmates believe that my quirk is simply making flowers grow and bloom. Quite the opposite of what you have told me about your classmates, Nezu says. You have told me how public quirk use is extremely common in your school. Izuku nodded. Everyone, teachers and students alike, use their quirks every single day. My homeroom teacher has even used his quirk to extend his hand out and slap me on the head whenever he feels that I'm not focusing on the lesson. Of course, by not focusing, Izuku meant doing anything that was not looking up and at the board. So, it would happen even if he was simply looking at his paper to take notes on what they were learning. It was another example of the rampant favoritism that went on at his school, given that Bakugo literally takes naps in class and yet never gets scolded for it. Nezu hummed a little, taking some notes in a separate folder on his tablet. He was aware of how little the law about quirks not being allowed to be used without the proper permits meant to people. It was the same in terms of the public quirk use law, given that many tended to use their quirks at home or work even when that wasn't allowed either. No one actually cared about those laws as long as they could get away with breaking them, especially when it came to kids who were too excited about their quirks to not use them. But even then, he did not like the things he was hearing from his apprentice. A school should be a safe place for the students. Uncontrolled use of quirks in public by young teenagers who likely don't have complete control of their quirks was dangerous. And the fact the teachers seemed to encourage their students to act like that made it even more concerning. Is there anything else you would like to know, Nezu-sensei? Izuku asked the hero principal. Nezu turned off his tablet and put it away. No, I think that's everything I need to know for now, he stated. It got more information than I thought I would get. Most others don't think about their quirk as much as I do, Izuku shrugged. They typically take what their quirk doctor says and never do any thinking for themselves. Oh, Nezu was intrigued once again. What do you mean by that? Because quirk science and quirk doctors are still both relatively new, Izuku explains. They are far from perfect. But people take the word of their quirk doctor as everything they would need to know about their quirk. So, they never do any experimenting because they're told what they can do by their quirk doctor and they believe them. You must admit that quirk doctors do have to know what they are talking about, Nezu says. I have had to talk with quite a few of them when students lose control of their quirks or go through a quirk awakening. Quirk doctors give great recommendations for quirk counselors. Be that as it may be, there are still many who get overconfident in themselves and their skills, Izuku gently argued. They start believing they're always right when it comes to quirks, even if they end up being proven wrong later on. Such as my mom's quirk. Your mother's quirk allows her to bring small objects into her hand, correct? Nezu remembered. Yes. Izuku says. Originally, her quirk doctor told her that it was a small form of telekinesis. But I never thought that made sense. Even if mom's quirk was telekinetic, she should at least be able to fully control what she does with small objects rather than simply pull them into her hands. So, you didn't believe what her quirk doctor had told her, Nezu guessed. Izuku nodded. Correct. I did a little more research and discovered that it's not a telekinesis, but a small gravity quirk. How did you make that discovery? Nezu was even more intrigued. As I said, being telekinetic would allow my mom control over small objects, Izuku said. But drawing them to her hand sounds more like how a planet's gravity pulls things toward it. After I made the suggestion, my mom went to a quirk counselor my dad works with sometimes to help with support gear for specific quirks. And I was proven right. Mom found out that she has her own gravitational field. Twice a year, she goes to see the quirk counselor to have her field checked just in case she accidentally interferes with the Earth's natural field. Luckily, it's always stayed the same and only works on small objects that she wants to bring to her. If it were not for your longing to be a hero, I would recommend for you to go into quirk science for your career, Nezu says. I do plan to get a license to be a quirk counselor after I become a hero, Izuku informs his mentor. I think every hero should get a license for that. After all, there have to be cases where a hero is called to deal with someone who lost control of their quirk. Nezu nodded. You are correct about that, Izuku. It's actually one of my requirements when I hire a teacher at UA. They must either have or be willing to get a Quirk counseling license in order to be hired. Which is completely understandable for a hero school. Izuku liked Nezu's thought process. It's not even just for the hero classes, Nezu says. Students in support, business, and even general education can have difficulties with their quirks. I am aware that UA is mostly known as the top hero school in Japan, but the number of non-hero students greatly outnumbers the amount of hero students we have. So, it's natural to give non-hero students the same recourses for quirk issues that the hero students get. It would not be fair to treat them differently just because they are not hero hopefuls. I am sure they would love to hear you saying things about them like that, Izuku said. I believe that all my students are special in their own ways, Nezu says. No one should be told they're not special simply because they don't want to shoot for the stars. I've had students in the business course who attend because they want to start their own business rather than work for a hero agency. I've had students in the support course who wish to build for civilians rather than heroes because they want to make life easier for them. And what about general education? Izuku asked. The paths they choose are not as set as the ones in the other courses because, as the course title says, it's general studies, Nezu says. But even then, plenty of special students have been in that course as well. I've seen students from general education go on to become great teachers, doctors, chefs, police officers, and so many other things. There really is no other hero like you, Nezu-sensei, Izuku smiled. There was a reason why Nezu was his favorite hero. Being such a dedicated educator only added to those reasons. Everyone is special, Izuku, Nezu tells his personal student. Don't let anyone ever tell you anything otherwise. I won't, sensei, Izuku nodded. Nezu-sensei, I've been wondering something, Izuku tells his mentor. Nezu looked up from the papers he had been doing while Izuku had been copying some of his analysis for the UA principal to have. What would you like to know, Izuku? He asked. I've been wondering why UA only has 2 hero classes, Izuku says. UA is known as the best hero school in Japan, and yet there are only 2 classes for heroes. Class A and Class B. The majority of students at UA aren't hero students. Nezu put down the pen he had been using for his paperwork. It was something Izuku had seen him do more times than he could count. And one thing he always noticed was that it was always pens. He never once saw Nezu use a pencil or anything else that could be erased. It spoke to Nezu's confidence in himself and his intelligence that he never used pencils. Izuku appreciated it mostly because pencils were made by destroying trees. I take pride in all my students, Nezu says. Be they from the hero course, support, business, or even general studies. All students are important to me. Izuku tilted his head to the side in confusion. What does that have to do with my question? He asked. Nezu continued. I want the best education possible for all of my students, but I also want to keep our standards up. UA students get a lot of attention, and it can't be allowed to let any of them believe they are the best simply because they get into UA. And you think having more than 2 hero classes would get in the way of that? Izuku tried to make sense of what his mentor was saying. When it comes to the hero course, it's different from the other 3, Nezu explained. We only allow 40 hero students in each year. I have told you about past issues of hero students who come in extremely confident, cocky, or even secretly not desiring to be heroes. Meaning if there are more than 40, there is the risk of there being more students like them. So, you think having more students in the hero course would run the risk of there being a chance they wouldn't end up becoming good heroes, Izuku guessed. UA is known as being the best hero school, not because of the number of heroes who have come from our facility, Nezu says. It's known as the best because of the quality of our hero alumni. You are going for a quality over quantity type of thing, Izuku nodded, understanding more of what Nezu was trying to say. Correct, Nezu stated. UA alumni have all grown to become some of the best heroes in Japan. Many are in the top 10. All Might, Endeavor, Best Jeanist, Crust, Gang Orca, and Edge Shot all graduated from UA. I believe you are also familiar with one of our other alumni who has been gaining popularity lately. Kamui Woods. It would be harder not to know Kamui, Considering he was just having dinner with us yesterday, Izuku rolled his eyes. I think he might marry my mother's cooking if that were somehow possible. While it's good to have as many heroes out there as possible, the quality of those heroes should also be considered, Nezu continued. Too many heroes these days are so focused on gaining attention and getting sponsors to earn them more money. They treat heroics as a way to gain fame rather than being real heroes. Another reason why my dislike of humans is completely valid, Izuku stated. I've certainly heard Kamui ranting about him lately the last few times he has been over. Unfortunately, it has become common for those chasing fame to choose to become heroes rather than go for careers in acting, music, sports, or any other form of fame. Nezu shook his head. They probably see heroics as a field they can get into more easily, since those other careers are still very difficult to make a name for yourself in, Izuku said. While she likely didn't mean it, that former street idol, Pop Step, became a reason for a lot of them thinking like that because of how she got even more fans once she started helping those two vigilantes, Knuckle Duster and the Crawler. She had her fans before, but their numbers increased greatly after she became known for helping them. It's been a long time since I thought about those three, Nezu sighed fondly. A few of my teachers fought alongside them during some of those instant villain attacks. I'm not surprised, Izuku says. My dad had been lucky to avoid becoming an instant villain during that attack where a bunch of random people suddenly transformed because of that swarm of Quirk-created bees. You don't sound like you disapprove of how there used to be more vigilantes about there. Nezu took notice of that detail in how Izuku spoke. Izuku shrugged. I think everyone deserves the chance to be a hero, even if being a vigilante isn't the most legal way in the world. If they have the drive, the longing to help others, and the determination not to give up after not being able to become a hero the official way, then I praise those who walk the path of the vigilante. You are, what most humans would say, an old soul, Nezu stated. I get that a lot, Izuku said. It might shock you to know, but the Crawler did try and become an official hero, Nezu tells his student. He had signed up for the entrance exam, but he ended up saving the life of a young girl and missed the exam. So, he ended up going to a regular high school and then to college, which was where his vigilante life started. What was his quirk? Izuku couldn't help but ask, being the quirk nerd that he is. His quirk is quite similar to the hero's slide and go, Nezu explained. While he is in contact with any surface, he can glide on it as if he were a human hoverboard. Normally, he can only do this with solid surfaces, such as the ground or even up walls. But he eventually learned he was also able to do this with the air, and which allows him a slight flight ability. Izuku got a look on his face as he pulled out another notebook he had with him. Nezu chuckled a little at how Izuku always seemed to be able to pull notebooks out of nowhere. He was slightly tempted to ask if he secretly had a second quirk that allowed him to do that. He did recognize the look on his face, though. It was the same look he got when he was thinking and putting puzzle pieces together in his head. So this is what it looks like when people look at me, Nezu said to himself as he chuckled. Izuku flipped through a few pages, examining some notes he had previously taken. He crossed out a few things while adding some others. Nezu watched with curiosity the entire time. Eventually, Izuku looked up. The entrance exam is fighting robots, he said. It wasn't even a question. It was a statement. Very interesting, Nezu says. And what makes you say that? What you said about the Crawler caused the last few puzzle pieces to be put into place, Izuku said. Not to mention how you also previously had me do some analysis on that class your hero teacher expelled, and some other students from other courses. Thank you for that punishment idea. By the way, Nezu evilly laughed as he drank some tea. Not just taking away his expulsion privileges, but giving him a teaching assistant for the rest of this year and all of next year to keep him in line. However, my favorite part was when you suggested switching the coffee in the teacher's lounge for decaf. Izuku smirked. From how you've described him, he basically lives off coffee and juice pouches. Take the coffee away, and he might be less grumpy since it just might force him to get a healthier sleep schedule. While I majorly doubt that, it's worth the shot, Nezu chuckled, drinking more tea. Anyway, Izuku got the conversation back on track. When I was looking at quirks of the expelled class, I noticed that all of them had quirks that were either combat-oriented or stealth-oriented, and only a couple had more unique quirks that didn't fit either of those other two categories. But not a single one had a mental quirk. And that tells you the entrance exam is robots. Nezu was curious to hear more of his protégé's thought process. For obvious reasons, combat quirks work perfectly against robots, Izuku says. Someone with a strength quirk like All Might or a powerful elemental quirk like Endeavors would easily be able to fight robots. Stealth quirks also work against robots since they can sneakily attack their weak spots or remain hidden until they can locate any kind of off-SW usage the robots likely have. More unique types of quirks would have some difficulty until they get creative in their ways to fight robots, or they have previously trained their bodies in martial arts to balance out their non-combat quirks. Mental quirks, on the other hand, do not affect any technology. So, those with mental quirks are at a significant disadvantage during the entrance exam. You prove yourself as the perfect person to be my protégé every time you can figure things out like this. Nezu looked proud of Izuku. Izuku flipped through a few more pages of the journal in his hands. He didn't even notice how Nezu hadn't said that he had been muttering most of his explanation. Though unlike most people, Nezu was likely one of the few who could keep up with him whenever he would start muttering like that. I also noticed from other student files that even those with quirks that would make them great heroes, and plenty even taking the entrance exam, never made it into the hero course, Izuku says. Oh really? Nezu got even more intrigued. Care to give me some examples? Izuku flipped through the right pages in his notebook. Meilin Osaka. Izuku read from his journal. She took the entrance exam for the hero course 2 years ago, but the file you gave me has her in the business course. Her quirk is called Mist. She can turn her body into any form of gas that she knows the chemical structure of, while also being able to keep some parts of her body solid if she wishes. I remember her, Nezu admitted. She displayed remarkable control of her quirk and even managed to score some points by tricking robots into running into each other by having them chase her and then turning into gas at the last second. Unfortunately, she didn't score enough points to get into the hero course. Her quirk would be perfect for a stealth hero, Izuku says. There are many invisible gases she could become to spy on villains. Or she could turn into knockout gas or a sleeping gas similar to Midnight's quirk to take out all the villains before any of them could react. But because her quirk didn't work on robots, she had to go into a different course. Was all the noise Nezu made as he listened to his protégé talk. Izuku flipped to the next page in his journal. Makoto Mitsusama, he read next. He's currently a second-year student in the support course. His quirk is called Hive Mind. It's a telepathy quirk similar to Mandalay, the leader of the Wild Pussycats. But his would be considered stronger than hers because Mandalay can only communicate her own thoughts to others with her telepathy. They can't respond the same way. But his quirk allows him to create telepathic links between people for up to an hour. They can communicate with each other using their thoughts. Another good quirk, Nezu nodded. He attempted the entrance exam for the hero course, but didn't manage to score a single point. Izuku flipped to a third page. Ren Suzuki, Izuku read. He's a third-year general studies student. His quirk is called Image Weaver. Basically, it's an illusion quirk. He can create illusions similar to how someone would paint or draw a picture. An illusion quirk would be extremely useful for a hero. Especially given the way that he creates his illusions, it makes sense that he could paint over a person to make an illusion on top of them. He could either make them invisible or he could turn them into a villain or a thug to infiltrate another villain's lair. You have given this quite a lot of thought, Izuku, Nezu says. Izuku closed his notebook, giving his mentor a thoughtful look. Nezu-sensei, I'm not usually the type to speak like this to a hero, but I feel that this needs to be said, Izuku says. Your entrance exam is broken. Except for a couple of students who managed to make it in despite robotic enemies, the entrance exam is focused entirely on combat-related quirks. Just because some non-combat quirks manage to make it into the hero course doesn't mean that the exam isn't broken. Heroes don't need to only be able to punch things to be a good hero. And yet from what we talked about before, UA still has some of the best heroes of Japan as alumni, Nezu reminded his student. But there could be more great heroes if the entrance exam expanded on all the different types of quirks that exist, Izuku says. Just look at the 3 students I mentioned. All of them tried to get into the hero course, but the entrance exam pretty much made it impossible. Even when they tried their best, such as what you said about Mei Lin, they're overshadowed by those with combat quirks. There are plenty of heroes who don't have combat quirks. Mandalay, Ragdoll, Sir Night Eye, Power Loader, Rocklock, Midnight, Sirius, Bubble Girl. All are great heroes or sidekicks with quirks no one would think are good for heroics. Nezu sighed as he looked at his student. Izuku basically preached about how much he didn't like humans, but it was moments like this that showed he wasn't as deep in his hatred as he believed himself to be. Izuku was a genuinely kind boy who cared about those around him. He had simply seen the darker side of humans when he experienced such harsh quirkism at a young age. But, despite everything, he was doing his best to improve hero society as much as he could. I am going to be honest with you, Izuku, Nezu says. I have attempted to change the entrance exam. Several times. I know how unfair it is for those with mental quirks or with non-combat quirks. But even as the principal, I only have so much power. To make a change to the entrance exam, I would also need approval from the Hero Commission and the UA Board of Directors. No matter how many times I've tried, I've never gotten approval from either. Izuku thought about it for a few minutes. His brain raced as he came up with an idea. How about we kill 2 birds with 1 stone, Izuku smirked. I am already interested in hearing your idea. Nezu could feel a slightly evil smirk growing on his face. You could start small, Izuku says. I bet it would be easy for you to get approved to start increasing the number of hero students in each class. Start off with only a couple of additional students in the classes that already exist. But the years go by, continue increasing to the point where you'd be approved to make a 3rd class. I can see where you are going with this, Izuku. Nezu nodded along with the idea. By increasing the number of hero students, the more chances there are for there to be students with non-combat quirks to make it into the hero course. Exactly, Izuku said. And as an addition to your idea, I can propose that the teachers be given a similar opportunity to the heroes who send students to the recommendation exam, Nezu added to Izuku's idea. The teachers can pick students who failed the entrance exam, or even before the exam even happens. They would become a mentor to them, similar to what I am with you. It should be an excellent way to open up new opportunities for those who could not enter the hero course in the normal way. Before either of them could continue, there was a knock at Nezu's door. Nezu quickly and happily called out "Come in." Izuku felt his inner fanboy come out a little when Present Mike walked into the office. Greetings, Nezu and little listener. Mike was quick to greet them in his dramatic style that Izuku often heard on his radio show. Hi, was all Izuku managed to say. Nezu chuckled a little as he saw Izuku's reaction. He may be an old soul, but that made it even more amusing to see him actually act like a kid whenever his inner fanboy would come out. Izuku can be as mature as he wants, but that doesn't mean he isn't still a kid. Do you have something that requires my attention, Mike? Nezu asked the voice hero. Just dropping off my latest reports. Mike put some papers down on Nezu's desk. I got some of the usual grumpy little listeners who are angry at the entrance exam since they tried to become hero students, only to end up in general studies because they couldn't get enough points. Nezu regained his evil smirk. Well, you might not have to deal with as many of those students for much longer, Mike. Thanks to my little pupil. Nezu gestured to Izuku, who looked ready to shrink into himself as he was praised in front of a hero by another hero. Oh, really? Mike raised an eyebrow, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stick up. Yes. Nezu's grin made Present Mike nervous. He came up with a brilliant idea that would eventually become one giant F***KU to the Hero Commission and Board of Directors for their refusal to change the entrance exam. Happy to help, Nezu-sensei. Izuku also grinned. You two continue doing that? I need to pick up some more papers from the teacher's lounge, Present Mike said. He was out of there faster than even Ingenium could run. By the time he reached the teacher's lounge, he looked halfway between being sick to his stomach or ready to lock himself in a nuclear bunker. Midnight was the first to notice him. Is there any reason why you look like you've seen a ghost? She raised an eyebrow. And I mean a ghost, not a kid with a ghost quirk. We need to find a way to go and live on the moon, Mike stated. Power Loader, you need to build a rocket right away. And why do I need to do that? Power Loader was just as confused as Midnight. Because there are two of him, Mike said. Nezu somehow found a mini version of him. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Deku Had Nature Control Quirk? We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Winterwolf99 for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on Wattpad for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comments section. See you soon in the next video.